I want to tell you a story about the oldest living things on Earth. This is a story about trees, gnarly pines that can endure for 5,000 years, and human institutions that can crumble in months. It's about the tension between what we want to know and what we have to keep secret. And it begins in Nevada with a graduate student, a chainsaw, and arguably the single worst mistake in the history of conservation.
I'm here at Wheeler Peak, a bit short of breath because we're above 10,000 feet. My friend Kyle and I hiked up here because we know that in this spot, somewhere hidden in this grove, is a stump. And not just any stump, it's the remains of what was once the oldest living thing on the planet. Great Basin National Park is already one of America's least visited national parks. Fewer than 110,000 people come here a year compared to the millions who crowd Yellowstone or Yosemite. There isn't even an entrance gate. You don't have to pay a fee to get in. And even fewer visitors make the high altitude trek to this bristlecone grove, which means that these trees, some of the most remarkable organisms on the planet, exist in near total solitude.
But even this isolation, high above the desert floor on the Utah-Nevada border, didn't protect the oldest bristlecone here. In 1964, a geography student named Donald Curry came to Great Basin. He was 30 years old, ambitious, studying ancient climates by analyzing tree rings. When he found a particularly massive bristlecone, known locally as Prometheus, he got out his tools and tried to take a core sample. But Prometheus wouldn't cooperate. When Curry tried to remove the core sample to age Prometheus, he found out bristlecones have wood that's incredibly dense. His expensive Swedish borers reportedly broke or got stuck. Frustrated and with his field season coming to an end, he made a decision that would haunt him forever. He asked the U.S. Forest Service, which managed the land before it was a national park, for permission to cut the tree down.
So this is it. This is the last piece of Prometheus after it was cut down in 1964. It's here in the Great Basin National Park Visitor Center now, where anyone can come and experience it, but of course it should have been left standing in the wild.
And this is the thing that turns tragedy into horror. Nobody knew exactly how old Prometheus was. Not Curry, not the Forest Service ranger who approved it, not the crew who ran the chainsaws on August 7th, 1964. They thought it was just another old tree, and they had no idea they were about to destroy nearly 5 millennia of history. Later, Curry started counting the rings. Past the founding of America, past the Roman Empire, past the Bronze Age. Ring by ring, the horrible truth emerged: 4,862 rings. And that was a minimum count. It was almost certainly over 4,900 years old. In a few hours, they destroyed something that had been alive since the Great Pyramids of Egypt were being built. The scientific community's reaction was swift and brutal. Curry essentially abandoned dendrochronology, that's the study of tree rings, spending the rest of his career studying salt flats, places that are, notoriously void of trees. Decades later, when a TV crew ambushed him with questions about Prometheus, he literally ran away from the camera. He died in 2004, carrying the weight of that August afternoon for the rest of his life. But it was the death of Prometheus that changed everything. It forced scientists to realize that discovery could mean destruction. And somewhere in the American West, there's an even older tree that scientists are trying desperately to keep hidden. But before I leave Great Basin to see where that tree lives, I need to make one more pilgrimage to understand why that secrecy is necessary. If the Wheeler Peak Grove tested our lungs, Mount Washington tests our resolve. Reaching this grove involves going to an even more remote part of the park, following a 1-lane washboard gravel road through the desert to a trailhead, and then a grueling 12.8-mile round-trip hike gaining 3,200 feet straight up above the valley. But those who make the hike can find something unique. Bristlecone pines growing on open ridges, each tree standing in majestic isolation against the white limestone cliffs.
The Mount Washington Grove is the largest in Great Basin National Park, and its trees face the full fury of Great Basin weather. They grow a lot more twisted, more sculptural than their protected cousins. Behind me here is the famous quarter tree featured on Nevada's commemorative quarter, a bristlecone with dramatically exposed roots where true trunks almost seem to embrace, testaments to centuries of erosion and survival.
Unlike the more accessible Wheeler Peak Grove, Mount Washington's trees exist in pure wilderness. No interpretive trails, no infrastructure, no visitor center.
But here's what strikes me about this place. Even with that washboard road, even with the four-wheel drive requirement, even with the big hike and all this altitude that we're dealing with, I'm not the first person to stand next to the quarter tree today. There's a lot of footprints in this rocky soil around us, evidence of enough people who have made a pilgrimage here to see a tree famous enough to appear on currency.
And that's the paradox of protection. These trees survive because they're isolated, existing in places too harsh for competition. But that isolation makes them incredibly vulnerable to human contact. When something takes 5,000 years to grow, even small impacts, like compacted soil around the roots, become permanent scars. If this remote grove faces pressure from the few dozen people who make it here, what would happen to a tree famous enough for being the oldest living thing on Earth? How many more people would suddenly find that brutal hike worth it, all for a selfie? The Mount Washington Grove teaches us about the bristlecone survival strategy. They don't just endure these harsh conditions, they require them. They utilize strip bark growth, where a thin ribbon of living tissue sustains the entire tree. When part of the tree dies, the living portion simply reroutes resources to whatever remains functional.
You can see that strategy everywhere here. Trees that appear mostly dead, bleached white by high-altitude sun, sustained by bark strips sometimes only 2 inches wide. It's a masterclass in efficient resource allocation, in knowing what to let go of and how to preserve what's essential. These trees have learned what we haven't, how to do more with less and how to persist when persistence seems impossible.
But they haven't learned how to survive fame. And that's why we're leaving Nevada, heading west toward California's White Mountains, chasing a secret that makes Prometheus look young. Trees whose locations are the most closely guarded secrets in American conservation. To understand why we guard these secrets so jealously, you have to understand how these trees evolved. Millions of years ago, the American West was cooler and wetter. But as the Sierra Nevada rose, it created a massive rain shadow, drying out the interior. The trees retreated upward, chasing the cold toward the sky. They became marooned on mountain peaks, ecological refugees on sky islands. Each population is a genetic time capsule. Lose one grove and you lose a unique evolutionary experiment that can never be repeated. If Great Basin National Park is lonely, the ancient bristlecone forest in California is desolate. The road climbs 7,000 vertical feet from the desert floor. It seems almost deliberately difficult to get there. And in a lot of ways, this makes the Forest Service's job easier. They don't want the most famous trees to be known or to be overrun with people. There are no paved roads to the highest groves, there's minimal signage around trees. They learned that easy access invites destruction.
This is where secrecy becomes strategy, and America made a conscious choice to hide the location of some of its oldest trees. After the Prometheus disaster, science and forest officials learned that some information might be too precious to share. So they made the revolutionary decision to hide the location of some of the world's oldest trees, knowing that fame might equal destruction.
The entire research culture around bristlecone pines operates on a need-to-know basis. Scientists sign agreements not to reveal locations. GPS coordinates are restricted. Research papers use codes instead of real locations. Photos are carefully taken that exclude identifying landscape features. The location of the very oldest trees are known by perhaps fewer than a dozen people worldwide. This level of secrecy is unprecedented in American conservation. We don't hide the location of Old Faithful or the Grand Canyon. We don't classify the GPS coordinates of Sequoia National Park's giant trees. But bristlecone pines are different. They're too old, too fragile, too irreplaceable to risk exposure. And nowhere is this secrecy more sophisticated than here in the Shulman Grove, where a tree named Methuselah hides in plain sight. Somewhere in this grove lives a tree that is, as of 2025, 4,856 years old. That's older than Stonehenge. It was discovered in 1957 by Edmund Shulman. When he published his findings in National Geographic in 1958, he called it the oldest known living thing, and the public response was predictably overwhelming. So the solution was radical: protect Methuselah by hiding it in plain sight. They created the Methuselah Grove Trail, but never marked which tree was the tree. Visitors walk right past it, never knowing which one they are looking at.
For decades, this system worked perfectly. Rangers would lead guided tours through the bristlecone groves, talking in general terms about the incredible longevity of these special trees, but never giving any clue as to the location of the 4,856-year-old prize standing in their midst. It became a point of pride among Forest Service workers. Everyone knew where Methuselah was, but nobody was telling.
But over the last decade, the secret got out. Through careful analysis of historical photos, documentaries, and internet sleuthing, Methuselah's location became an open secret.
We think it's important to honor the culture of secrecy around Methuselah and to help keep those trees safe, so we're not going to reveal where you can find it. But if you come to the Shulman Grove and you hike the Methuselah Trail, at one point you'll pass right by it, and you'll know you'll have stood in the shadow of something that's been around almost as long as human civilization.
Since the secret has gotten out, the result has been predictable: trampled vegetation around the tree's base and attempts to take souvenirs. But the damage is somewhat limited, partially because by now, there's an even bigger secret to protect. Before he died in 2013, dendrochronologist Tom Harlan, that's Shulman's protege, analyzed an old core sample taken decades earlier by Shulman. And the results were staggering. The tree it came from was over 5,060 years old, the first known tree to break the 5 millennia barrier. But Harlan, having learned from the Methuselah breach, kept this one safe. He never published the location. And when he died suddenly in 2013, the trail went completely cold. And here's the twist. Researchers have since been unable to locate the original core sample Harlan analyzed, and the location data from the 1950s is too vague to pinpoint the tree. The oldest known tree, the oldest living thing we've ever discovered, is, for now, lost to science. So somewhere in these mountains, probably within a few miles of where we were hiking, grows the actual oldest living thing on Earth. It could be any one of these gnarled, weathered giants. But there's a deeper realization here too. Hundreds of trees in these groves have never been aged. Taking core samples creates wounds that can last centuries. So scientists sample selectively. Among these undated trees could be specimens even older, trees that have been growing since before the first cities. The trees teach us about deep time. Walking by them, it's easy to forget that they house centuries in a single inch of diameter. Each ring tells a story: the year Pompeii burned, the cluster when the little ice age gripped the northern hemisphere. These trees were here for all of it. But now they face a new threat. For the first time in history, bark beetles are successfully attacking bristlecone pines. Climate change is warming these high-altitude groves, allowing the beetles to move upward. The trees that survived millennia by enduring harsh conditions are being undone by a warming world. And it's not just climate change. We're threatening these trees again, not with chainsaws this time, but with policy. The Forest Service is facing significant budget problems for the 2025 fiscal year as supplemental funding from recent legislation expires and costs rise. Republicans' 2026 budget proposal is even more dire. This has led to widespread hiring freezes and the elimination of thousands of seasonal positions across our national parks and forests. At the ancient bristlecone pine forest, this means reduced protection when the trees are already vulnerable.
We've seen a lot of other hikers on the trail this morning. We've met some incredible paid staff from Sierra Forever who are manning the visitor center. But one thing we haven't seen is Forest Service rangers. The Inyo National Forest was subjected to budget cuts just like the rest of the national forest system, which means for the busiest part of the year here in peak summer, a lot of the day the trees are effectively unprotected.
And it gets worse. There is persistent political pressure to sell off federal lands entirely. In June 2025, Senator Mike Lee of Utah proposed legislation to sell millions of acres of federal land. Though the proposal was withdrawn after fierce backlash, the threat remains. These trees take 5,000 years to grow, but we can eliminate their protection in a single legislative session. And the irony of that is breathtaking. These trees mastered the art of persistence, of playing the long game. But now we've changed the rules. We've created threats that operate on human timescales, decades, not millennia, budget cycles, not ice ages. Maybe instead we could learn from the bristlecones. They've figured out that survival isn't about growing fast or dominating the landscape. It's about finding a harsh place, growing slowly, making each ring count. And maybe that's why America keeps the world's oldest tree hidden. It's a recognition that some things are too important to expose to the glare of modern attention.
Standing here among these trees, I better understand the value of secrets. We live in a world that demands to know everything, that has to solve every mystery. And maybe this one time, it's okay to just let it be. To say this one tree, this ancient sentinel, will leave in peace. Because if we can't protect, or we choose not to protect, the oldest living tree on Earth, maybe the best hope for it is that we never discover it at all.